Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first webinar of this online summit to discuss value-added medicines. The theme today is Rethinking Continuous Pharmaceutical Innovation in the European Union. I am Annie Panele, and I will be the moderator today. I'm an international health consultant, and I'm honored to be facilitating this event. Before introducing our distinguished panel, I wanted to say a few words. Firstly, this is my pleasure to announce that we have 435 people registered. That's one of the perks of doing online events. I also wanted to say that we have a Q&A box. So this it's different from the chat box. It's open at all times. And when you have a question, you may put your name, role, affiliation, and you may also direct the question to a specific panelist that you want to answer the question. Also, I need to let you know that the presentations will be made available on a PDF format after the event. And last but not least, and we're going to start right now, during the webinar, we're going to display questions for you to answer. So please, or participate. You will see the very first question in a minute, and I will leave you to answer. We will look at the results after the first panelist has spoken. But let's get started. So today we will talk about the need to rethink continuous pharmaceutical innovation in the European Union. Since the COVID crisis hit last year, there has been some increased awareness that repurposing medicines is part of the solution. And this did shine a light on value-added medicines to a broader extent. Defining value-added medicines is medicines from known molecules which bring improvements to the patients, to the healthcare professionals, and or to the payers. And this can be achieved three ways: repurposing medicines, reformulating, and combinations. And the combinations do not stop with the drug-drug combinations. They also include combinations of medicines with a device, for example, for improved delivery. And this can be also medicines together with digital technologies, which, for example, could be used to improve patients' adherence. We will spend the next hour and a half discussing how this continuous innovation fits into the broader EU agenda to support access to treatment and innovation. We will first hear short presentations from our panelists, and then we will have a whole panel debate, and Q&A are open at all time. Now, it's my pleasure to welcome our first panelist, Aurelio Arias. Aurelio is Engagement Manager in the Thought Leadership Practice at IQVIA. He's based out of London, and he focuses on off-patent medicines, including biosimilars, generics, and value-added medicines. He has a consulting and industry background, and he's going to share the output of his research and talk us through the future perspectives for value-added medicines.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. If we could just advance the slide, please. And once more. Great, thank you. So throughout my presentation, I'm going to attempt to give you a very broad overview of what value-added medicines means from an IQVIA point of view at a global level, what we might have encountered over the last year, the year of the pandemic, and as Annie mentioned, really how value-added medicines played a key part in treating many, not only COVID-specific related symptoms, but also other diseases that necessarily require different modes of actually administration or reduction of risk. And so value-added medicines, you know, I'm proud to say, we're very much on the forefront of helping physicians actually battle the pandemic over the past year. And then I would just like to end up this presentation really reflecting on what the value-added medicine of tomorrow might look like, talking about some growth trends and areas that potentially offer increased opportunity, not only at a global level, but especially here in Europe. So many of you may have seen the market size that we present on an annual basis at IQVIA. Now, generally, we see that the market is very concentrated in the US, and we'll go into that a little bit further on the next slide. But on the left-hand side there, you see the total, sorry, if you could just go back one slide. On the left-hand side there, we see the total market at around $35 billion. This is a change from what we have shown in previous years, but like a value-added medicine, we try and continuously improve and refine our model to try and capture this very broad and tricky sector. And so at times we have to make decisions in order to get more depth, more clarity, and hopefully deeper insights into what a value-added medicine is and how it behaves. We sometimes have to cut out from the breadth and the scope where necessary. So the first thing I'd like to point out is that we can only really capture certain medicines that are linked to the actual physical drug itself, such as reformulations and recombinations are easy to capture. Repurposing medicines, adding on different indications, slightly trickier, and indeed any devices or digital add-ons also very tricky. So we have excluded those. Those are out of scope. This means two things. One is that the model that we show you is significantly smaller than the actual real universe of value-added medicines, and that is key to understand. And the second thing is, because we are relying on IQVIA data, this is also at list price level, which means that once you take into account the net pricing through discounting and rebates, the values may actually change. So do keep that in mind. But what we do see is that it is a very concentrated US-centric sector. That means that any movements in the US really affects global trends. And that's what we have seen in the last few years. A slight deceleration globally, driven by large US-centric medicines, either going through price restructuring, so prices are dropping, or maturing, maybe reaching the end of its exclusivity period, and therefore the market is adjusting to that. The donut in the middle really shows how concentrated the US is. It's about 2/3 historically of all value-added medicine sales. But on the right-hand side, I'd just like you to focus, what I have there is across the x-axis is the 5-year annualized growth rate, and across the y-axis is last year's growth. So in effect, it means that any bubbles that we see above the diagonal line have accelerated over the last year, the year of the pandemic. Any bubbles that we see below the diagonal line are those that have decelerated. And across most therapy areas, we have seen a deceleration of medicines that were not necessarily directly linked to battling the pandemic. But I'm pleased to say that with value-added medicines, that top right quadrant has remained strong, and we have seen success in ophthalmology, clearly a good need for reformulating and different ways of administering medicines to the eyes. Respiratory, again, a very strong and large therapy area that is driving a lot of the growth in Europe. And of course, oncology, our only sort of specialty value-added medicine, rising up there in the year of the pandemic. And importantly, later on, you'll see how CNS, I feel, is going to be driving a lot of the future opportunities in this sector. Next slide, please. So I talked about the importance of the US, and predominantly that is because it has enabling policies, specifically the 505(b)(2) regulatory pathway, that really starts the process of not only defining and identifying value-added medicines, but also giving it a way to enter the market more efficiently and in a recognized manner, so that knock-on processes such as pricing conversations are a lot easier once they achieve that designation. And it is something that from a European level, we should be willing to look over the pond at our neighbors and then try and emulate some of the positive aspects from these policies that really allow a better competitive environment in which to operate in. But like I said, the US is the global leader within value-added medicines as we measure it. And so we see on the left-hand side the table of sales in the US. They are measured in billions, driven by the areas like adrenaline and indeed some digestive enzymes and some cardiovasculars. Whereas in Europe, we measure them in the millions. So in the US, it's about 10 times larger, the top products compared to Europe, and they predominantly drive those global sales. So on the right-hand side, I would just like to focus on the number of value-added medicines in these markets. Now, I would like to caveat here that to get a true representation of the value-added medicines, we would need to go in pretty much on a market-by-market analysis to discard those that might have fallen through the cracks and to add in those that we definitely know are value-added medicines, which I may have missed out through the digital combinations, the devices, or indeed the repurposing, as I mentioned earlier. But what we do notice is that, again, the US has on average a much larger amount of value-added medicines than the whole of Europe on average. Now, I've broken out EU5 there, just so that you can see that roughly they're not doing too badly in the top European countries, right? The colored lines, and indeed that black one there for Germany, represent EU5. But if we look down at the bottom, the dotted black line there, this is the European average as a whole. So once we add in non-EU5 countries, actually the tail of value-added medicines drops sharply. It's very weighted to EU5 countries. The US continues to grow in the number of value-added medicines it actually has, and indeed for emerging countries, those that are emerging and also have a future within the pharmaceutical sector, Brazil, Russia, India, China, Turkey, Mexico, etc., all sit within the far emerging bucket. That is also rising, but there we see that it's a combination, obviously, of many countries, around 20, and so it does look like a large number there, but indeed within that far emerging bucket, we see that value-added medicines are very useful over the standard of care that they have. Next slide, please. So I would just like to talk briefly on the pandemic. The year of the pandemic was one where it really showed the value brought on from the value-added medicines sector as a whole in order to treat patients worldwide. And not more so in areas that are very widely publicized, such as repurposing dexamethasone, or indeed remdesivir, which is a medicine that was discovered 10 years ago, albeit not necessarily a strict value-added medicine, because it was repurposed by the originator, not by a third party. But we've also seen that now, more recently in the news still, sarilumab, which is Kevzara, and tocilizumab, which is Actemra, those not necessarily on the off-patent side, but really showing that repurposing of medicines has been one of the key rapid response tools that we have as a healthcare system to battle this pandemic, and will continue to do so, alleviating symptoms where the vaccine cannot do so in time. So some of the benefits that we saw from the pandemic, things like reducing the risk of infection, were very important. And we saw that with many countries like the UK, switching changing the guidance from one medicine to another in order to reduce the need for patients to visit crowded hospitals. And at this stage, I would just like to point you to the example on the right-hand side. On the top, we have UK taxane's volume. At the time of lockdown, Abraxane, which is a value-added medicine and offers, compared to paclitaxel and docetaxel, an increased safety profile, meant that guidance in NHS England said, please switch over to Abraxane. It will lower the need for patients reaching hospitals and therefore reducing stress for already busy physicians, but also congregating patients all in one place. Abraxane was, of course, has seen a very large uptick in the volume that we see compared to its plain generics. There are other ways that value-added medicines have helped during the pandemic. Some of them have been through lowering the cost of the healthcare system, clearing the backlog faster, but really the idea of allowing greater patient empowerment, giving them the flexibility to administer medicines where they would like to have them administered, whether it is at home or in these specialized clinics rather than hospital, has been very important for patients worldwide. On the right-hand side, again, I'd just like to show you a French example. This isn't necessarily a value-added medicine because we are talking about a biosimilar here and against its originator biologic, but the key thing is that on lockdown, the subcutaneous formulation in France was preferred over the intravenous formulation. The intravenous is the biosimilar, the subcutaneous is the originator, and the intravenous as a whole was less preferred to the subcutaneous purely because the subcutaneous is faster, it can be administered away from hospitals, and also it is an easier way for administration by nurses. And so it did two things. One, it cleared away patients from hospitals, and two, it did so faster, allowing easing the backlog. Now, the key thing about this is that this wasn't a price-driven decision. This was driven by the need from the healthcare system. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide now. I will be talking about maybe what you might see in future. And I would just like you to ponder the fact that, there are many areas in value-added medicines that we see going to be increasingly important, not least the areas of injectables, especially when you're taking a look at empowering the patient. So pre-filled syringes, auto-injectors, cartridges, pens, anything that really moves patients away from the hospital are continuously seen by physicians and the healthcare system as a significant value add. And that comes hand in hand with biologics. Obviously, biologics need to be an injectable, have an injectable mode of delivery. But also we're starting to see the first biologics value-added medicines coming through. So I would like you to really try and understand what that means. Is it a biosimilar such as we see from the likes of Celltrion with subcutaneous infliximab, or can you have non-biosimilar value-added medicines as well, as you might see with bispecific antibodies or conjugates of patent biologics? But I would like to focus on CNS because I feel like here is a very acute problem that we're going to be facing over the next few years. The number of patients, people reporting symptoms of anxiety or depression, both in the US and the UK, where we have seen some data, has either doubled, tripled, or even quadrupled in stages. I feel like when lockdowns ease, this number is going to go back down as people are allowed to go back out, yet it's not going to go back to the levels that we had it before the pandemic, purely because we're going to have extended periods of lockdown, and also it's going to be an issue of obviously carrying on the way that we have built in the habits over the last year. And just to finish up, these areas of depressive disorders or anxiety really have affected the young, females, and disabled adults acutely. So areas of opportunity there. Where we have seen ourselves, there's digital coming in. We see digital drug combos out of 250 audited therapies. A full third actually have a combination of digital plus the drug. And we see that a half of those are from CNS, and then following on oncology and the endocrine system. So I have run out of time. I would just like to point out that this digital area is going to be expanding in future. So please keep an eye out on that. And with that, thank you very much. And I'll pass you back to Annie.
Thank you very much, Aurelio. Yeah, very interesting to note this fit for CNS and digital technologies. Before elaborating with you on a specific point that I would like to hear more about, now we're going to display the first poll question for the audience, and we will look at the results as Aurelio has finished. So Aurelio, you talked a lot about the market and the different countries, but a little bit less about the pharma industry. Would you be able, in a nutshell, to tell us what strategies pharma companies have taken so that they succeed with value-added medicines?
Thank you, Annie. You're quite right. So typically, a pharma company will come to us for advice on trying to not only understand and define the market, but also ask us about what success means within value-added medicines. And this is a very difficult question to answer a lot of the time because purely it's out of the hands of the pharma company. Many times it's more to do with taking a look at the regulatory and pricing structure, not being bucketed in with, in the sort of generics category. But areas that we have seen succeed, and this is typically what we say to companies, is first, you have to play where you're strong at. So it's no use trying to go out and put a significant investment in an area that you're not necessarily comfortable in, just purely because you see the numbers or the data or historical data actually showing that being a growth area. So an area where you're strong at, where you believe that you can make a significant change in the way that a patient either takes their medicine or indeed helping the physician administer or prescribe that medicine in a better way. In doing so, it's good to look at case studies, but really it's about going out from your own areas of strength and expanding outwards like that. Thank you. Oh, I believe you're on mute, Annie.
Yes, thank you very much. Do we have the results of the very first poll already? Yes, we do. Now, this was to understand how familiar our audience was with value-added medicines. So we see that most of the people who joined us today are very familiar with what type of innovation they encompass. So we're talking again about, well, for the 16%, and we will go back there, starting with Gautier, who will focus on repurposing, but this is like repurposing, reformulation, and a combination where Aurelio focused. Now, thank you very much for responding. This is very insightful. Our second panelist, as I said, Gautier, is going to talk to us about repurposing. Gautier is a director of clinical research at the Anti-Cancer Fund. The Anti-Cancer Fund is a non-for-profit organization that looks at promising cancer treatment that others leave behind. And his role is to ensure that trials are done in a way that deliver most outcomes for patients. And Gautier will talk to us about the societal value of repurposing. Gautier.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. So yes, as Annie said, at the Anti-Cancer Fund, we're very much interested in drug repurposing, and I would like to indeed try in the few minutes I have to address the question of the societal value of repurposing. So if I could get the slides, please. Next slide. So I think, yeah, we have talked about this, and I think everybody in the audience is familiar with that case. So the case of dexamethasone for COVID-19. As you all know, it has been shown to reduce the mortality rate of patients under mechanical ventilation or under oxygen supply affected by COVID-19. The recovery trial from the UK was the main trial supporting the use of dexamethasone for COVID-19. And as you can see here on the slide, the same group decided to try to estimate the benefit of a systematic use of dexamethasone for COVID-19 in the UK. So they looked at a period of 6 months between July and December 2020, and they estimated that approximately 12,000 lives have been saved in the UK with the use of that drug. That translates into 102,000 life years gain thanks to the systematic use of dexamethasone in those patients. This is, of course, a very cost-effective intervention or therapy. And I would want to stop my talk here and say, okay, I answered the question. The societal value of repurposing has been demonstrated thanks to that case. Now I am a scientist and I'm not happy with that answer. And I think it's important that we start moving from those anecdotes, because I cherry picked a very successful example here, which is an easy tech. And if I can get the next slide, please. I would like to say that we have to move away from those kind of anecdotal evidence and now try to document and quantify the real value of repurposing. And so I'm very happy because this year, a few weeks ago, actually, there was a paper from a Canadian group where they looked at approximately 200 FDA-approved drugs that later became generic, so rather old drugs because they had to be generic at the time of the analysis. And what they wanted to look at was, of course, number of drugs that found a new indication on label post-approval. And you can see this is about a third of the drugs. But they also look, as is shown on the figure, that there is a peak of those new indications. So on the x-axis, you see the time to first generic entry, with 0 being the year of generic entry. And on the y-axis, you see the probability that a drug will have a new indication on label that year. And so we see that peak at around 4% for the drug for the years 8, 7, and 6 before generic entry. And then there's a fast drop and it becomes 0 after generic entry, as you can see. And so from a regulator perspective, then people may think, oh, you see, there's no innovation anymore with those generic drugs because there's no new indications indeed. And I see that at least on my screen, I can't see the full slide, but I hope you can see it. You see that I did some work where there are new indication off label that are coming up later on. And so in a work I've done with a different sample of drugs, I could find that about a third of those drugs had off-label indication coming in. So not regulatory indication, but clinical indication. And this is very important. And so in my opinion, if I can get the next slide, please. In my opinion, this is happening. So I'm a big fan of Daniel Kahneman's book, and he has coined that cognitive bias called "what you see is all there is." I guess some of you are familiar with that, but what it basically means is that if you don't see something, you don't know it exists. And so from a regulator perspective, in my opinion, they see the first figure. When a drug is approved for the first time, there will be new on-label indications. But as time passes, then the drug will get in generic entry and there will be no new indication. There will be no innovation anymore. But I actually think that this is compensated in reality by off-label indication. And this is a bit of a problem because this is not visible by most of the regulators, though many of them are very familiar with the problem. So at the Anti-Cancer Fund, we strongly believe it's very, very important to move as much as possible off-label indications to on-label. Next slide, please. And why is that important? Why does it really matter? It's because off-label use come with a set of problems. And the first one, which is for me the most important with my background, is that there's no official evaluation of the scientific evidence. And so if you talk with any regulator or a clinician, physician, they all think that off-label use is a mix of very low quality evidence. But actually there is very high quality evidence in some cases, and there is bad quality, a low quality evidence in other cases. And because we don't have that official evaluation, it's very hard to sort out what's good from what's bad. The second problem that comes with off-label use is there's no data collection system in place. So when a drug is approved and a new indication gets on label, there might be there's a data collection system for the safety, learning more about the safety of the drug in the new population, for instance. And this is not in place when there is only off-label use. There are some liability issues for the prescribing doctors. Of course, they are allowed to do it, but still some of them may be a bit afraid of doing it. There are some reimbursement issues. And this is really a big issue. That's if it's off-label, there's no health technology assessment, and every country need to find a solution, whether there's a high pressure from the clinicians and the patient for reimbursing the off-label use of a given drug. There might be supply issues as well following. For instance, if a drug is become withdrawn from the market or is not used anymore in its primary indication, it's not going to be produced anymore. And then all the off-label uses will not be met anymore. And so patients who are treated off-label will not get access to their drug. And the last one, which is very important for me, is the patient's concern. We all know that most patients will look at the label, and if they see that their disease is not on the label, they may wonder why they are being treated with that drug, which may affect compliance as well. Next slide, please. So I wanted to highlight that we are not the only one to have identified that's off-label, and the fact that there's no good regulatory framework for the generic drug. There was a very good article in Politico a couple of weeks ago showing that the regulatory situation of dexamethasone for COVID-19 was a bit problematic in Europe. Thank you. Next slide. I would like to sidetrack a bit now in the context of that value-added medicine summit. That's for me, and I'm the director of clinical research of an organization. When there's a clinical development program being initiated, the first question we ask ourselves is whether there's a need to add value. And I think this is very important. There are many examples where they're very good there is value-added medicines, and there are examples where actually we could use the medicines as is. And I think this is one of the first questions to ask ourselves. So I've put some examples here, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but an example of value-added medicines to me in the context of oncology is the use the pediatric formulation of temozolomide, for instance, which is used for high-grade glioma, brain tumors. And the nice thing about this is that it has allowed the extension, or at least trying to find new indication in pediatric population as well. So this is really, really interesting addition to the existing formulation. Then there are cases where we can use the medicine as is, and I don't think there is a need to add value, for example, with the use of colchicine for pericarditis, which is now in all the cardiovascular guidelines. Next slide, please. So I would like to conclude by saying that I'm convinced there is societal value of repurposing. I'm very happy to see we have more and more quantitative data emerging to document that. But I think we could get higher societal value, and we could get the highest societal value if all of the conditions I've listed on the slide would be met. The first one, which is the most important, is we need high quality evidence in confirmatory trials in areas of high unmet needs especially. The second one, we need a good and full development program to explore those new uses. And this can only happen thanks to a long-term collaboration between the generic companies, academia, research organization, patients organization, and the regulators. Third, I would say that there is a need to add value when it's needed, but there is a need, whether value has been added or not, there's a need to incentivize and reward also when the drug is used as is. So I think, for example, the people from the recovery trial could get a prize for what they got, what they achieved, and could continue their work and bring additional value to the society. And then last but not least, and I think this is very important, there's a need to change the label. And I insisted on this already. And I would like to highlight the fact that the STEM group from the DJ Santé has proposed a pilot study, so all the stakeholders could learn by doing, and I think this is very important. Unfortunately, it's been postponed because of COVID-19, but I think it's even more timely now that this sort of pilot project could be implemented, so everybody, all the stakeholders could learn and try to find a solution to make that happen. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Gauthier. Very good presentation. I think there's a theme that has already come up. It's how doing those trials can, I mean, it's not just about understanding the benefit risk balance, it's also about improving the patient's adherence. And I think this is a concept that is often associated with value-added medicines. In the interest of time, I'm going to move to Helen Lee, and you mentioned the STAMP multi-stakeholder group. She may have a little bit of, she may have some insights there as well, and we'll have more questions for you at the end of this. So Ellen is an administrator in the European Commission. She works with Unit B5 of DG Health and Food Safety in the pharmaceutical strategy team. She will talk us through some of the key points of the EU pharma strategy and the Europe Beating Cancer plan as well. Helen?
Hello, yes. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. I'm pleased to be here and to be able to explain a little bit about the pharmaceutical strategy. So, yes, if you can put the slides on the screen, please. Thank you. And the next slide. So, the pharmaceutical strategy was adopted by the Commission on the 25th of November last year. And we'd like to obviously thank everybody who contributed to the consultation mechanisms for the strategy. And now we're in the process of taking this forward. The strategy is looking at the whole of the life cycle of the medicine, from development to authorization and then market access and beyond. So it's a broad range of the strategy, and the direction, the Santé is not working alone in this, it's working with the other TGs as well. So we're supported by everyone for this activity. And so the strategy has identified various activities to be taken forward, and it's actually been outlined into 4 broad areas, which will be covered in these my initial slides. And then I will go on and speak a little bit about the the cancer, beating cancer plan, and research activities, and finally the STAMP activities that have been mentioned. Okay, thank you. So in relation to the sort of one of the first pillars of the pharmaceutical strategy, we have the ensuring access and affordability of medicines and for patients and health systems and sustainability. And within this, we have the theme of the unmet medical need, which is often the driver of research and innovation, and whether that's also the repurposing is also looking to fulfill unmet medical needs. And linked to that, we have, of course, this area of incentives. And one of the areas of unmet medical needs where we have had incentives already is the orphan and pediatric regulations. So the regulations related to rare diseases, and the regulations related to medicines intended for children, where we have specific rewards developed for development, and then at the moment we're actually also reviewing that legislation. So this is an important area where we already are pushing for innovation for medical needs. As part of the other aspects which I think is important is looking to facilitate the collaboration along the life cycle of a medicine. So we're aware of the fact that there can be barriers in terms of the regulatory needs or the obligations in terms of studies that need to be completed for authorizations or post-authorizations activities. And so there are activities going on already which are looking to streamline this through having joint or parallel scientific advice for development of medicines and also for the health technology assessment. So these activities are aspects which are already being considered and have been highlighted in the strategy as well. Another important aspect for the pharmaceutical strategy is the access to medicines, and therefore one of these aspects which we'll be looking at is the system of incentives and whether they should be linked to other obligations such as placing products in the market or placing products across the EU as a whole. So this is an issue that was raised in the in consultation of the strategy and has been highlighted as an action. And the final area for, I think on this slide, is for the affordability. And of course, I mean, for affordability or pricing and reimbursement isn't an area that the Commission itself has direct influence on. I mean, there may be certain aspects in the legislation that can be impacting this, which we will take a look at during the review of the legislation. But in fact, most the competence of the pricing and reimbursement is with the national competent authorities, and therefore the Commission looks to work with the national authorities to build best practices in that side of aspects. So this is the focus of the Commission's work in this area. The next slide, please. So the second pillar is the enabling sustainable innovation, and here the Commission, we're looking to the colleagues in DG Grow and are looking at the supplementary protection certificates, so there's a review of that going on. There's also colleagues who are in Sante and also Connect who are dealing with the digital aspects, so we'll be building the European health data space in the future, looking at the interoperability of data, so these are important to access the data that's available and bring it into use for the authorization potentially, or the scientific evidence generation before and after. It can supplement evidence coming from the clinical trials which are expected for the evidence collection for authorization of medicines. We'll also be looking for and linked to this is of course the innovation and the digital transformation. And here, with respect to the legislation, there are shortcomings in terms of the legislation having been drafted some time ago, and now you have the digital transformations, you have other scientific developments which need to be considered and adjust the legislation as needed to take these into account. And finally, we have on this slide the issue of the regulatory flexibility in the regulatory system, and we will be looking at streamlining procedures and seeing how the administrative burden related to managing marketing authorizations and processes can be streamlined as much as possible to make it to facilitate the updating of the product information, etc. So the next slide, please. And this one is less related. It's just to complete the 4 pillars which we have. There's ensuring availability and addressing shortages and succeeding in the global arena. But one important area here which may be relevant to the repurposing activities is actually the crisis response mechanisms, because the Commission has we have put forward a proposal for the Emergency Response Authority, which will build on some of the experience that has come from the coronavirus pandemic and how the countermeasures that have been taken during this period, and to see how these lessons learned can be used in future, addressing future crisis or emergencies. So this is something where the Commission will continue to work on. And the other aspect is the global side of things, where we are looking to ensure that the European industry, the European market, and is also, there's a level playing field for competitiveness across globally as well. So those are the main fields in the pharmaceutical legislation. So if the next slide, please. The Commission has also recently published the Europe's Beating Cancer Plan, and within the cancer plan, it's been highlighted that there will be the platform to improve access to the cancer medicine. So the idea here is to support the research repurposing of existing medicines, and it'll be looking to test models for closer collaboration among stakeholders, and to pool existing the data and use new digital tools for repurposing. So including, there's the aspects such as the high performance computing and supercomputing to enable this complex modeling and simulation, so that we can bring forward the potential new treatments more quickly and at reduced cost, hopefully. And building on this, there will also be other projects to rapidly test the existing molecules and new drugs. And one example of this, which is not related to, the example of this is in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic and the developments there. So if you move on to the next slide, which so this slide concerns the project specifically that came out of to address the COVID-19 pandemic, the Escalate for COVID, where this possibility of supercomputing has been exploited to look and identify potential molecules for the treatment of the coronavirus, and through this, as you see, we have there's 40 potential molecules have been identified, are being considered in preclinical trials, and there is actually one for in clinical trials, the Loxafen. So clinical trials are being developed to take this forward to see if it is actually a suitable treatment for COVID-19. So those are the types of things that would also be considered for the Beating Cancer plan. And then for my final slide, if you the next slide concerns the STAMP project, which has been mentioned. And the STAMP project was, well, STAMP is the Safe and Timely Access to Medicines for Patients. It's an expert group of the Commission's Pharmaceutical Committee. And the issue of repurposing was raised, and from those discussions, it was taken forward to a group which included the industry representatives, not-for-profit organisation, the Anti-Cancer Fund, and also patient representatives. And the idea of the framework, which is outlined here, is to is to get, as was said, to encourage the off-label indications to be brought on label. And the first step of that is to ensure that the evidence that is being generated is of a suitable, is appropriate and will be accepted for variations to existing marketing authorizations. And this is through, that will be encouraged through scientific advice from the European Medicines Agency or national competent authorities in member states. And then once this evidence generation has begun and it's promising that there could be a new indication, then the not-for-profit organizations could reach out to companies who have the medicine already and can look to see how a variation completed for that medicine to include the indication on label. So this will, as was said, be tested through a pilot, which has been delayed, and we're not completely sure because of the coronavirus when this project will start, but it should hopefully start in the coming months, and this will allow to test out this potential for bringing the off-label use through where evidence is coming from not-for-profit organizations into on-label indications. So that was a quick run through to to the presentation, and I'd like to thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen, for a very comprehensive presentation on very broad topic. Again, I see some questions popping up here. We will save them for the panel discussion. And without further delay, I would like to move on to our fourth speaker today. Our fourth speaker is Arun Narayan, and Arun has a strong track record in multinational pharma companies. He is currently head of commercial development at Viatris. Today, he is going to share the view on the elements to create a favorable environment for continuous innovation. Arun.
Thank you, Eddie. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So first of all, good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen, VAM stakeholders and VAM supporters. Thank you for being here. Thank you for making time for this webinar. My focus today is all about creating a favorable EU environment for value-added medicines innovation. We've heard some very interesting developments. We've heard a lot about COVID, and we strongly believe that there is more to value-added medicines, and this is a significant opportunity for healthcare in Europe. Next, please. So I think what are VAMs has been covered quite extensively, so I will not repeat it, but I will certainly spend a couple of minutes to talk about how we can assess the value and measure the value that value-added medicines can bring to us, can bring to patients, can bring to healthcare professionals, payers, and to society as a whole. So if we look at different value dimensions that are defined here, and these value dimensions will be discussed at length in tomorrow's webinar. So I will not go into great detail, but use this as a thought starter to say, so if you look at health gain, then improving efficiency or effectiveness of a treatment is an important parameter. If we look at satisfying unmet medical needs, then repurposing and extending treatment options with new indications is one example. Improvement of patient-related or patient-reported outcomes, for example, quality of life is a good example as well. Improvement or reducing the burden on healthcare systems by increasing efficiency. We all heard about the challenges with hospital visits, and making the healthcare system more efficient by reducing as much as possible effectively the need for patients to visit hospitals is one area that value-added medicines can also help. And last but not the least is the burden on the household. So the burden on the household includes the burden on the patient, but also on the caregivers. So these are all different dimensions by which the benefits of value-added medicines can be measured and should be measured. Next, please. So I don't want to spend too much time here because everybody's spoken about these. And in each case, there is, whether we talk about drug repositioning or repurposing, whether we talk about reformulation or about combinations, whether they're drug combinations, drug device, or drug digital combinations, each has demonstrated its value and its continuing need when taken into account from a COVID perspective. So in the COVID context, I think the whole dialogue around repurposing, around providing capability to patients to administer treatment safely and effectively at home, which can be done through drug reformulation, improving the connectivity between patients and HCPs through digital value-added medicine, which empowers patients on one side, but also provides HCPs or healthcare professionals greater access to understand the effectiveness of treatment, the adequacy of treatment, and also understand what are the patient preferences. So I think this last year has more than ever demonstrated the continuing need and the importance of focusing on value-added medicines. Next, please. So we firmly and strongly believe that today the EU is losing out on affordable innovation. In Europe, the value-added medicines innovation ecosystem is a far cry and markedly different from what it is in the United States. The US already has a flourishing value-added medicines segment, pharmaceutical segment, which is based on a framework legislation. We've all heard about the 505(b)(2) regulatory pathway. That has many benefits. It offers a clear framework for companies to invest in VAMs, for payers to recognize value of VAMs, and of course, most importantly, for patients to get access to better treatments through value-added medicines. And on the right side, the donut, which was already discussed by Aurelio, it's a clear reflection of what we are saying, that the US is 65% and the EU is merely 13%. This tells us that there is a lot to be done, and we must move in the direction where we create the EU as a much bigger stakeholder in this donut. Next, please. So the European pharmaceutical framework as it is today fails to deliver for value-added medicines in three principal ways. The first one is that there is a very cumbersome, unpredictable approval process, regulatory approval process. Different countries take different approaches, take different views. At different points in time, the view can change as well. So this creates an obstacle for developers to actually try to plan, determine, assess the cost of investing in developing a value-added medicine. The second challenge is the absence of incentives for continuous innovation. We all know that value-added medicines are more complex, more expensive, take longer to develop, higher risk of development when compared to traditional follow-on products or generic products. But at the same time, all these factors are not considered when it comes to identifying or finding incentives to support the development of value-added medicines. The third and equally important area is the challenge in just getting a fair valuation for value-added medicines. It sounds very simple, but it is not, and it's one of our biggest challenges. And their payers often fail to recognize what value VAMs bring. And in many cases, VAMs are clubbed, categorized along with generic medicines. Also, pricing and reimbursement bodies require disproportionate amounts of evidence, and they apply HTA principles for value-added medicines, which were actually developed for NCEs, and that poses its own challenge. So all these factors demonstrate that there is a gap. VAMs don't fit in the framework today. And we need dialogue, we need action to change that. And the importance of changing that has been more than explained by my three previous panelists, colleagues. So I won't go into it again, but this just emphasizes the need for what we are discussing today. Next, please. So there are, of course, bright sparks and movements in the right direction. And the first one I will take is Belgium. So Belgium recognizes, acknowledges the value offered by VAMs through the pricing and reimbursement legislation, which has been in place since 2018. And the value-added aspect of medicines in this legislation is justified by means of pragmatic scientific argumentation. Also, Belgium has started to reimburse apps, digital apps, since January 21, which is based on the demonstration of social economic evidence. Germany, on the other hand, passed a law in 2019, which allowed doctors to prescribe digital apps with health benefits, which are reimbursed in Germany. And those apps must demonstrate patient-relevant improvements, such as improvement in the state of health, reduction in the duration of disease, to quote two examples. And these apps can be accessed by patients through two pathways. One is through a physician's prescription, and the second is through a patient's request. Moving on to the UK, the MHRA launched the ILAP, which is the Innovative Licensing and Access Pathway, earlier this year. This aims at coordinating MHRA's own activities with partners like HTA bodies like NICE and the NHS itself. And this aims to accelerate time to market, facilitating patient access to medicines early. And very, very positive note is that this covers not only new chemical entities and biological medicines, but also new indications and repurposed medicines. So there are beginnings, and these beginnings need to be consolidated, strengthened, and there is much more to do. Next, please. And we are advocating three distinct, clearly defined pillars. The first one is designing a fit-for-purpose regulatory framework that will enable clarity on development through a unified pathway for fit-for-purpose scientific advice, early dialogue with all stakeholders, including patients and payers, pragmatic evidence generation. The second pillar is about recognizing VAM, or value-added medicines, as a category of innovation that deserve incentives, proportionate incentives. And we are proposing to do that through granting a non-cumulative period of 4 years of data exclusivity, subject, of course, to certain conditions, and provided additional value can be demonstrated by appropriate data. Last, and again, definitely not the least, is recognizing the value that value-added medicines bring to the healthcare systems, and shaping the pricing and reimbursement rules to accept pragmatic real-world evidence through the assessment of relevant value dimensions. We spoke about some of them earlier. They will be discussed again in depth tomorrow, and with an appropriate burden of proof. So to conclude, we recommend the establishment of a new simplified regulatory pathway for value-added medicines, which would be defined under a new Article 10.7 of the EU directive. And that, along with these three clearly defined pillars, together will give us the ecosystem and the framework that we need to encourage and to give value-added medicines the right place they deserve in our pharmaceutical world and in our society. Now, there is still more positive news. And if you go to the next slide, it shows some quotations from what we just heard as the pharmaceutical strategy. And these already sow the seeds for what I've been discussing. These already demonstrate that there is a recognition for the need for value-added medicines and the benefits that value-added medicines can bring, and will certainly continue to help us in creating that ecosystem we are advocating. And we will, I'm sure we will create it. We will have very lively dialogue, and we will create it with the support of all of you here and our extended stakeholder community. So with that, I thank everybody for your attention and look forward to questions.
Thank you very much, Arun. I've got a question for you, but before I ask it, I think we're going to have the second poll question displayed. Yeah, thank you very much. So here's what I wanted to ask. So you mentioned sort of a comprehensive framework to encourage value-added medicines. Can you tell us in practical terms how the 3 elements of the framework you just presented will work, practical terms?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for the question. And I think, yes, it's very important to relate that to practice and how we would actually go through the process. So in very brief terms, so once the idea has been generated, and the idea would be generated, of course, talking to stakeholders, healthcare professionals, to patients, on what is the gap, what is the unmet need, where do we need to do to develop a value-added medicine, and once that idea is well developed, then the developer would go into the first pillar, which is the clearly defined regulatory pathway, and then we would expect to have one unified scientific advice discussion meeting, which would encompass the views of all the different member states rather than having to go one by one. So that's a very, very, very important element. And again, this would include an early dialogue with stakeholders like payers, and of course, patients' representatives, so that the value can be further defined and explained to the regulators and to the payers. Because in the end, these value-added medicines bring value to patients, and that has to be kept front and center at all times. And of course, the discussion on what is pragmatic value, what is pragmatic data generation or evidence generation that can demonstrate the value of such a value-added medicine. Then, of course, the conversation around incentives, and it is subject to conditions, it's subject to demonstration of appropriate data. And then when it comes to going through the process of development and clinical programs, and then coming up with a product that is ready to launch, then the dialogue with the payers, of course, remember that we started the dialogue with the payers right up front during scientific advice. We understood what the payers would need in order to effectively evaluate the value offered by such value-added medicines. And provided those can be demonstrated, then the fair value for those value-added medicines and the reimbursement of those can be negotiated, finalized, and a product can be brought to market. So it's all about reducing uncertainty, improving predictability, because in the end, investment follows predictability. And if there is an absolute chaotic process where everything can be 0 or 100 along the way, then it is very, very difficult to predict, and therefore it hinders innovation and investment in innovation. So that to me is a kind of practical way we would navigate the proposed framework that I just set up. I hope it answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. Thank you very much. Can we see the result of the second poll to see what our audience, so fit for purpose regulatory framework. First is the recognition of the value proposition for healthcare systems through appropriate reimbursement. So in this poll, the audience had the opportunity to select more than one answer, obviously, but then what we see is that the value proposition recognition is the most important one. We'll get back there. Now let's spend a little bit of time on our questions, and I've seen many questions from the audience. So there's one question which is addressed more specifically to Gauthier, but after Gauthier's provided his answer, others please feel free to chime in. You emphasized the need to encourage on-label registration and use for new indication, how would you manage the thorny issue of off-label use when you have two different medicines on a VAM with a registered label for a pediatric version, and the other the same generic molecule with no pediatric label? So how do we do this trade-off?
Yeah, thank you, Annie. I've seen that question in the chat and I replied already, but I can repeat what I wrote down orally. I think it's useful. I think there's no discussion here. I think we should strongly encourage the use of the value-added medicine in that case and discourage the use of the generic drug with no pediatric label. I think that's pretty clear. It's been developed, especially for children, so it doesn't make sense to use an adult version in this situation. And I guess it probably refers to the case of Emengel. And I know some countries have tried to promote the off-label use of the generic version, and I think it doesn't make a lot of sense. So yeah, that's my personal opinion.
Thanks. Any other reaction from the panelists to this trade-off? No, not specifically. So what?
Sorry, I was on mute, and I was just I will just say that is a very important area, that where there is on-label available, then all of us should encourage the on-label use rather than the off-label use. Otherwise, it defeats the whole purpose of getting to the point where the studies have been done and on-label is available. So clearly, I think in order to incentivize such research, it is definitely the way to go, and definitely even regulators should discourage off-label use once on-label use is available through studies and through adequate evidence.
Okay. We can maybe we have a third little poll just to see how strong the need is in our audience. Like, have you ever felt a change or innovation in the medicine you're taking could bring significant improvement? Whilst you answer this, I have a question on antibiotics, and I thought maybe Helen could get us started, unless someone else wants to chime in first. So here's the question. New antibiotics are regarded by prescribers as something to have in the back pocket for the future, but which leads to a probable uptake after any exclusivity period has expired and little return on investment for the inventor. So what can be done to incentivize investment in novel antibiotics when there is a reluctance to use them?
Yeah. Thank you, Annie. And this is certainly an issue. I mean, it's been highlighted in the AMR strategy, which is some time ago, and obviously the Commission is looking into this. I mean, we've done research to see about the options for the pull incentives and push incentives that could work in the area of antibiotics, but it's aware of, and we're looking into these options as to what can be done to maybe stop the existing antibiotics being taken off the market, and to encourage the new antibiotics to come be developed and be on the market, because certainly, as said, actually we don't want those to be used. I mean, the idea for these future new antibiotics is that they would be kept in reserve for the cases where other options have no longer work properly. So I haven't got the answer to that. It's something that we, it's in the AMR strategy. It's something that work is ongoing, and I expect, I'm sure there'll be opportunities if people in the audience have ideas that would support this, that they will be able to come forward and bring those to the table as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other panelists has some thoughts on this, on the incentive structure or value?
Yeah, I think just quickly, because I also appreciate this is slightly off topic to value-added medicines, because we can't necessarily repurpose existing antibiotics to make them do something that obviously they cannot do necessarily. But I do feel that in general, with novel antibiotics, we should be treating them as what they essentially are, which is an insurance policy. And in doing so, innovative pricing models, maybe we can borrow from the insurance industry around subscription models or buying a policy in order to actually go and reimburse a company's commercial needs is probably the way forward. But I'll stop there just so we can get back onto the VAM track.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe before the next question, we can look at the need, how strong a need we feel within this audience. So the answer to our third poll question. Right, so we see 3/4 of our audience had some need for a change and innovation in a medicine we've been taking to make it perfect to meet our needs. So that means there are plenty of ideas out there to improve the value brought by existing medicines. Any comments on this? Any surprise in the panel?
It's what I mean. I would expect even more, but yes, I think it's a pretty high result as a yes, and if only many of those ideas could actually be converted into reality, I think it'll help all of us, and that's what we are attempting to do, to bring those ideas to the table and to find a way to convert those ideas into reality. With everything else we have to go through to do that, but at least that's the concept. It is many of the ideas will always come from patients or from HCPs. They are the primary source for innovation, especially as value-added medicines.
Thank you.
Annie, I have a point of clarity. Maybe I missed it or I wasn't clear enough. So when I mentioned exclusivity in my slide as the middle pillar on incentives, so we are talking clearly about data exclusivity. I just want to emphasize that it is on the slide, but if I didn't mention it, it's data exclusivity, not market exclusivity.
Okay, thank you.
Is what we are advocating.
So the slide before the last slide in Arun's presentation, middle,
Right.
data exclusivity, not market exclusivity. Now a broader question. We've heard Gautier's thoughts on repurposing in cancer. And the question is, how can we facilitate repurposing in all disease areas? Do we have to go disease area by disease area? Is there a way to think about it and to engineer repurposing so that we facilitate it across? Is this something that any of you have thoughts they want to share about?
Yeah, maybe I can give my opinion on that. I mean, this is a great question. But as I said, I think there's no single solution. But what I believe is important is to define the disease areas with the highest unmet need. I think this is how we need to approach the problem. And in those, then we need to find ways to promote more repurposing research. So if you take the COVID-19 example, the disease that did not exist about a year ago, and then suddenly, then we have a new disease we have to deal with, and there's high unmet need, right? And so obviously everybody decided to look at existing drugs. Okay, so I think I would make an analogy with disease for which we have not made any progress over the past, 40, 50 or centuries. And I think I mean, it's our position here. We're trying to identify those diseases in cancer and try to promote more repurposing in those cancer types, because there has been no progress because of new development. So we need to try to find a solution. That's probably a pragmatic approach I would take.
So prioritizing,
Yes.
using the disease areas where there has been the least progress or there has been the least success.
Exactly. And commercially neglected. I think that's also quite important.
Yeah, first thing is to figure whether they go together. Any other panelists want to chime in here? So some question that I think pertains to all of you, and all of you have mentioned the early dialogue with the patient, the involvement of the patient in the STEM group. So can you it's a question from David Delaney from Medicines for Ireland, which was, how do you think we best get patients involved in driving access and experiencing the benefits of VAM? So it's via digital tools and platforms, but let's think about VAMs in general. How do we best get patients involved in driving access? Aurelio, go ahead.
If I may jump in here, it's to the entire spectrum, and it starts with identification of what those areas are where patients believe they need support, or the industry can do better. I think it starts there, and then it goes all the way to the other end of the spectrum, where defining the benefits that such a medicine provides to patients will help us also value that innovation. So it's the entire spectrum, and patients are front and center, absolutely in the middle of it. So I think we cannot do any of this without patients' involvement, without being closely aware, or very well aware of all the intricacies of how a medicine works or doesn't work adequately, and whether we can do something about it, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, as I said. So to me, they are pivotal in this. Patients are pivotal in this whole journey of value-added medicine.
Thanks, Arun. Aurelio, you had some thoughts.
Yeah, I think just to add to Arun's message there, you definitely need patient involvement as the anchor point for your value-added medicine innovation, so that it's recognized by physicians, it's recognized by patients, and then the value ultimately is recognized by payers, so that you can get that return on innovation. Yet I would say that for certain disease areas, we do have more patient engagement, and discounting the fact that digital is very much driven by demographics as well. But across value-added medicines, you might have chronic indications, for example, chronic diseases. You tend to have more engagement from patients. That might be things like diabetes, asthma, some rare diseases. Pediatric diseases as well tend to have high patient engagement from the family of the patient. And so these areas with strong patient push are one of this is where you can begin in terms of gathering momentum. That's not to say that acute or I guess other diseases tend to have less patient engagement, but clearly also serious ones. And by serious, I mean ones that significantly reduce quality of life or indeed lifespan. Well, those also tend to have a lot of patient engagement in terms of doing things like, extra work in recording their symptoms or tracking their disease. These areas actually, patients see a great deal of benefit from. And so these are also indications where you might find it easier in terms of engaging with those patients.
Thank you. Any additional thoughts, or we can move on to our very last question before we have to wrap up? I'd like to go back to the lesson learned during the COVID-19 crisis, where we've seen that value-added medicines can deliver great benefits. And it's not just to treat the disease itself, it was to help free space in the hospital, it was to help people get less side effects. Where does Europe stand with regards to the development of value-added medicines digital options? how can we stimulate digital transformation in the off-patent? So yeah, like in the context of rethinking continuous pharmaceutical innovation in the EU. So where does Europe stand with regards to the development of VAM digital options? Who wants to start?
So again, maybe I'll jump in because I covered part of that in my presentation.
You did.
So yes, there are glimmers of hope. Things are starting. So the seeds are being sown of recognizing that digital value addition is also very important, very relevant, should be recognized, should be reimbursed, and it is definitely the future. So everything is digital more and more, and for those of us who are not born into the digital age, it is still a learning curve. But yes, that's where things are heading, and we must ensure that we create the capabilities to be able to assess these digital opportunities effectively, to understand what value they bring to us. And I think that's one challenge. There are many other challenges. Aurelio already published a white paper on this, so he can tell us more about the challenges. But there are challenges around data, privacy, security, data sharing. There are all those challenges, but the opportunity is definitely in digital. In one of the most important opportunities is in digital. And as developers, as regulators, as payers, all of us have to enhance our capabilities in this area. Because that's what patients are moving towards, and we have to move in the same direction pretty rapidly, in my view.
Thanks, and we will have thanks, Arun. We'll have a more complete panel on digital VAMs on Thursday. I think, Aurelio, I've got one last question for you. I think we can squeeze that in before we wrap up, because we talked about digital VAMs, and we'll get back there on Thursday. But one topic that we didn't talk much about, and I think I think is also worth mentioning, is the biologic value-added medicines. Could you, if you have some thoughts, tell us what you think biologic value-added medicines might look like in the future? You talked about the injection routes. Any further thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. So biologics clearly are going to be very important for the off-patent sector in the very near future. We've got more and more large biologics coming off patent just over the horizon. Biosimilars are leading the fore in terms of defining the sector and what it looks like for an off-patent biologic. But as more and more biosimilars come to market, it's becoming very crowded. It's becoming harder for manufacturers and commercializers to actually differentiate the value from the biosimilar itself. And so they are resorting to price in order to differentiate. And that's not good for a biosimilar sector that is nascent and upcoming. So my thoughts are that value-added medicines within the biologic sector are going to be very critical for differentiating off-patent biologics. Some of the frontrunners include Celltrion, who are looking to a more way of trying to reformulate their offerings out there, but still fit within the biosimilar framework. Now, I would like just to encourage everyone to think, let's move away from just thinking about biosimilars here. What other ways do value-added medicine biologics, how else could they happen? Well, necessarily they would have to be off-patent, but not necessarily driving a large R&D upfront cost. So you could have conjugations of old generic small molecules with an off-patent biologic, a biosimilar, combining them. R&D not necessarily too burdensome. It will require trials, but hopefully regulations can also come in and start supporting the burden of the cost of trials. But I think we are going to start seeing, to summarize, we're going to start seeing a gray area or emerging between strictly off-patent and the innovative side. There's going to be somewhere in the middle there for value-added medicine biologics.
Yeah, so what you're saying essentially is that the scope for value-added medicine keeps growing. Yeah.
Yes.
It's time to wrap up. I've got one last ask to all of the panelists. And I would like you to mention one thing, if you could change one thing in the system to make continuous pharma innovation available to the greatest number. Like if you can answer in one sentence, what is it you would change, the one thing? Starting with Aurelio.
Sorry, Annie, could you repeat that question? I didn't quite catch that.
What's the top priority to make patient the greatest number benefit from value-added medicines? One change in the system, what would be your top priority?
I think smarter recognition of the value that's actually created. And that really starts with just trying to really think about the patient from the payer's perspective. So it's about getting everyone together in a smarter way.
Smarter recognition of the value created. Thank you. So in the order of the panel, Gauthier, if you have to change one thing in the system.
Yeah, facilitates change of the label. I think that will create a series of events that will give more societal value. Yeah.
Thank you. So smarter recognition of value, facilitate change of label. Helen, what would be your big?
I can't pin it down for one thing for value-added medicine, but what I would say is call out, because I mean, we're now changing the legislation. So please get engaged, everybody get engaged in the consultation opportunities that you will have. And then you can, with the evidence to support it, your positions, so that they can be taken into account at this opportunity for revision of the legislation.
Thank you. So engage in consultation opportunities, bringing the evidence. Last one, Arun.
Well, all the good ones are taken. So, I definitely want to plug for two, and that is, and these are the regulatory framework and the incentives. So to me, they are the starting point of our capability to innovate. So I would ask for two.
Thank you. Well, that makes it 5. It's a good number. Smarter recognition of value, facilitating the change of label, have all the stakeholders engage in the consultation opportunities and bringing the evidence, suited regulatory framework and incentives. Thank you, Aurelio. Thank you, Gauthier. Thank you, Helen. And thank you, Arun, for participating. I'm sorry we could not meet in person. Thank you all, the participants, for your attendance. Thanks for your question, and thanks to our summit sponsors, Aegis, Teva, and Viatris. Now, it's my pleasure to announce the next webinar. It's going to be tomorrow at the same time, 2 p.m. And it's going to be about what counts, the evaluation framework for added value for continuous innovation. With this, I will wish you a great rest of the day, and thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
you.